All right, welcome back to opinionsairefree.com. It's a site where you can leave your opinion on various topics. And unlike many other sites, we're not going to get slapped around by people who don't disagree with you because we limit responses to your opinions to just a few characters. We'd like to know what people think about various topics and subjects. And you can see a list on the homepage. Just go to opinionsairefree.com, opinionsairefree.com, as for the spelling. And pick on a topic that interests you. Some of them were posted, a number of years back before certain things have happened in the news. But the topics are all still timely. Here's a question for you. And now this question is specifically for Canadians because there are different home equity tax laws around the world. And I'm not going to pose on one question because that may not affect you in the U.S. or in Australia or wherever because, again, there are different laws. But as for Canadians, is the current federal government looking for ways to tax your equity or to force you to utilize your equity under threat of taxation? So let's look into this for a second. Now, when the Trudeau government was floating around, like something you might find in a pool of water, they had posed the question and they were quickly told to buzz off by the public. And they quickly put that off the table. The Carney government says that it's not going to impose any kind of an equity tax. And although there was a study done to suggest maybe looking at an equity tax for properties over $1 million, which for the most part is anything in Toronto, anything in the GTA, most of stuff in Vancouver or everything in Vancouver, and a lot of the urban centers. So that's a pretty wide net. I mean, if you've got a cabin somewhere in Northern Ontario, you might get underneath that threshold. But you know what governments are like when they put a threshold in there, they always change that threshold. Or if they do lower, they just raise it somewhere else. Once they get your the little hooks on you, it never seems to come out right. So here's my question, though. Why would they do that? Well, let's look at it this way. The governments, and this is all around the world now, want to somehow stimulate their economies, but they are reticent to increase dollars into the system because, of course, that could create an inflationary scene, and then they'd have to raise the rates up, interest rates, to fight inflation. So it's almost like you're creating your own problem. Now, how then do you introduce liquidity into your economy without printing more dollars and devaluing the actual dollars you have? Well, one way is to motivate people to use unused dollars, in other words, savings. And we have heard of schemes, mostly out of Europe, that want to implement a penalty tax on unused equity. So in other words, if you're a saver, if you've been saving your money, if you're working hard to save all your money in the bank, you might be penalized for having the money in an unused account. Wow. So let's look at equity now. If there are billions of dollars of equity in real estate, residential real estate in Canada, and if the government can motivate you to use your equity to take it out and to use it for your purchases, to supplement your retirement, to supplement your living expenses, even if you're not retired, but you still have equity and you've paid your house off. But like so many people, you're still working until they put you in a box because you cannot afford to retire. The motivation is that if you use some of your equity, you will not be taxed on that equity. You still have to pay some interest on it because someone's going to give you the money. But you will not be taxed on the equity if you use it to augment your living expenses. Now, let's just take a round number. Let's just say that there are $2 billion of equity introduced into the general economy. Does the government benefit from this? Well, yes, because we have an HST. So you have 13% benefit going to the government coffers because of this money that is being spent, that you are spending because you don't want to be taxed by not spending the money. Do you understand? So in order for this to happen, the government has to motivate certain things into effect. One is, first of all, they're going to basically kind of shame you through their releases on, paying your fair share of tax. And who determines what your fair share of tax is? But the government that is determining what your fair share of tax is. And they say things like, we want to promote housing equality and this and that, although it has nothing to do with housing equality. That's BS. Okay. So put a plan into effect where you, as an individual, when you have equity in your house, you can then use that equity to augment your, or supplement or augment, whatever word you want to use, your living standards, all right? And it's not going to be taxed as a capital gain. And if you don't, then the government can say, well, now we're going to tax you on the capital gains of your, in other words, your equity. Because the way they'll say it, well, you know what, you basically made money while you were sleeping. Your equity went up. They never mention it when the equity goes down, just when the equity goes up. But let's look at this for a second, okay? You have a house, you buy it. It starts to deteriorate the moment you buy it. So over the years, you put your money into it, money that you earned and you pay tax on. So this is after-tax dollars to basically keep your investment, if you want to call it that. I don't like using that word. Your primary residence into you keep it from deteriorating. In other words, you have to fix the roof, you have to fix the windows, you have to fix the toilet, you have to fix the plumbing, so on and so forth. You have to fix your septic if you're in the country. You have to spend tens of thousands of dollars, maybe even more than that, over the course of your ownership in order to keep the property from deteriorating. And then, of course, if you improve your property, those who would assess your property say that you've improved it, and they want to tax you at a higher rate because you've improved your property, when really all you've done is you kept it from going downwards. So you're being penalized for keeping the maintenance of your property up. Okay, seems a little bit unfair, but this is how the tax system works in this crazy world of ours. So you then get punished because you've been making money while you were sleeping, right? And again, that's just not true. Yes, the equity has gone up, but again, you supported the building of that equity with your after-tax dollars. So now you've got this equity, you've paid off your mortgage, they've got this bubble of cash, so the government's looking at it going, pardon me, how do we get our hooks into that money? Well, we cannot put an equity tax because people will throw us out of government, or at least if they're smart. So what we're going to do is we're going to implement a system where you can then borrow your own equity without penalty. There might be a little bit of interest without equity, and then put that into the general economy to improve the economy, and you will not be penalized by being taxed on the capital gains component that they want to introduce. So in other words, you're taking your equity out and just using it on your own. And if you choose not to do that, well, there's always a possibility that the government may say, well, you got $1 million in equity there, bud. And there are people out there who don't have that, and we have to maintain the pensions, so maybe we'll just give you a little less than the person here who doesn't have any equity built up, doesn't have that little nest egg. Okay, so there's a use it or lose it component there. And if you use it, you won't be taxed on the capital gain portion. You just have to pay a little bit of interest because, of course, somebody's got to give you that money up front, like the bank. And that'll be in effect until they figure out a way to turn the thumb screws up and make a little more money on the money that you're paying to use your own money that you saved while you were maintaining your property with the money that you earned after you pay taxes to the government. You see? Okay, very clear. And if you don't, again, then you're going to be nailed with an equity tax. Because like they say, you don't deserve to have an increase in your value of your equity while you're sleeping. The way the government works, and is that you cannot buy or sell anything in this country without paying your fair share of tax, or the fair share of tax that is imposed on you by the government that determines what your fair share of taxes are. Okay? And if you have money that you've earned and you haven't paid a capital gain on it, they want their piece of that. And if they can't take it as a tax, they'll take it as some kind of a fee, or they'll somehow motivate you to use the money, and then the government will, will make some kind of return on that, because of course there is HST, so it's 13% that they can use for whatever they want. Give it to another country to rebuild with contracts that they get from someone who works in the current government that decided to give your money away to the country that has to be rebuilt. I don't know. Jump cut edit, nothing fancy. I just want to insert this. I want to remind you that the current Grand Poobah, no insult to Fred Flintstone, one of my heroes, of this country, Canada, is a guy who was making probably millions and millions of dollars as a central banker for other countries, and thought, why do I want to make tens of millions of dollars working for other countries when I can go back to Canada and make 400,000 some odd dollars as the PM of this country? I don't think this guy really is the prime minister as much as he is the head of a corporation of Canada that is part of a bigger conglomeration called whatever you want to call it, the Davos Group. I mean, again, this is just, hey, my opinion, my speculation. Let's not go crazy, people. And don't start with throwing out the word conspiracy. That's dumb. I'm just saying that some of the policies that we seem to have shoved down our throats here, and some of the language seems to be very similar to the language that is being thrown out in other countries, especially in that beautiful area called Europe that is so destined to push their country into a war that maybe should never have happened, and probably wouldn't have happened to some guy who looks like Barney Rubble, coincidentally, didn't go off and whisper into another guy's ear, hey, we'll take care of you. Go ahead. Yeah. And now that things are winding down, because, of course, two things have happened to cause us to wind down. One is that the weapons flow has slowed down, and the second is that the reconstruction contracts have started to be presented forward, and who is making money from those reconstruction contracts that would be paid mostly by government grants from countries that will get the reconstruction contracts. In other words, your tax dollars. Wow. I wish I knew how this game worked. I'd be a billionaire by now. So, we have, again, these policies coming out of, over there, a housing situation that is not getting better, like over there, energy policies that don't make a lot of sense, like over there. And we're going into a commodity super cycle, and we are a commodity rich nation that if it doesn't, we don't get our act together, we're not going to be able to profit from that super cycle. And of course, we got to do it with the environment in common and make sure everybody is equally benefiting from this. But again, other policies that are from over there are making that very difficult, and perhaps we'll talk about that in another time. But I just wanted to insert this cut to remind us all that our Cram Poobah is probably not the Canadian loving guy that you think he is. But again, hey, non-accusation, just a gentle opinion that we have to look at where these policies come from. And when you look at the policies and where they're coming from, you see this coincidental parallel in policies. And then that it's going to drive everyone to a specific goal or ending. And what is that goal? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's 2030, you shall own nothing and be happy. I don't know. Anyways, end of the cut. Back to the previous video. Anyways, opinionsarethree.com. If you don't agree with my opinion, listen, by all means, leave your opinion. And if you have an opinion on any other topic, our neighbors down south, the current economy, the housing situation, whether or not whether it's going to be good this year, I don't know. Leave your opinion, opinionsarethree.com, and just indicate where you're from. You don't have to leave your last name. You don't have to leave an email because no one's going to have those. Just leave your opinion, and hope to talk to you soon. Bye-bye.